Every letter you are reading right now traces back to Africa. Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. The alphabet you are using to read these words, the shapes, the sounds, the system of matching marks to spoken language, has its oldest traceable ancestor in a writing system developed by African and Semitic workers in the Egyptian Sinai Peninsula approximately 3,800 years ago. The Greek alphabet did not invent writing, it inherited it, from a chain of transmission that begins in Africa. This is not a fringe theory. This is the current consensus of historical linguistics and archaeology. And it is one of the most important facts about human civilization that almost nobody knows. Let us trace the line. In 1905, British archaeologist Flinders Petrie discovered a series of inscriptions carved into the turquoise mines of Serabat el-Khadim in the Sinai Peninsula. The inscriptions dated to approximately 1850 BCE. They did not look like Egyptian hieroglyphics. They did not look like any known writing system. They appeared to be something new, or rather, something old that had not been seen before. Scholars spent decades working to decipher them. What they found changed the history of writing permanently. The inscriptions were Proto-Sinaitic script, the earliest known alphabetic writing system in human history. Not logographic, like Chinese characters, not syllabic, like Mesopotamian cuneiform. Alphabetic, each symbol representing a single consonant sound. The principle that underlies every alphabet on Earth today. And the people who created it were Egyptian and Semitic workers, people living and working in Africa, in the Egyptian sphere of influence, who took Egyptian hieroglyphic symbols and adapted them into something entirely new. Something that could represent spoken language with a small set of portable symbols that anyone could learn. They invented the alphabet. The line of descent from Proto-Sinaitic is direct and documented. Proto-Sinaitic developed into Phoenician script around 1050 BCE. Phoenician was adopted and adapted by the ancient Greeks to create the Greek alphabet around 800 BCE. The Greek alphabet became the Latin alphabet, which became the alphabet you are reading right now. Every letter in the English language, A, B, C, is a direct descendant of marks first carved into rock in Africa nearly 4,000 years ago. The letter A was originally a pictograph of an ox head, called Aleph. Turn the capital A upside down, and you can still see the shape. The point at the top was the ox's nose. The crossbar was the horns. The letter B was a pictograph of a house, called Beth. The letter D was a door. The letter M was water. Waves. Every shape that your eye recognizes as a letter of the alphabet began as a picture carved into stone in Africa. Linguist John Chadwick, who helped decipher Linear B, the ancient Greek writing system, described the Proto-Sinaitic breakthrough as one of the most significant intellectual achievements in human history. The invention of the alphabet is not a small thing. It is the foundation of literacy. It is the mechanism by which human knowledge could be recorded and transmitted across generations. Every book ever written, every law ever codified, every letter ever sent, every contract ever signed. All of it depends on the alphabetic principle that was born in Africa. But Proto-Sinaitic is only one thread in a much larger story. The Kingdom of Kush, in what is now Sudan, developed its own fully independent writing system, Meroitic script, around 300 BCE. Meroitic was alphabetic, systematic, and capable of representing the full complexity of the Meroitic language. It was used to record royal decrees, religious texts, and administrative documents across a kingdom that at its height rivaled Egypt in power and cultural sophistication. Scholars have fully deciphered the phonetic values of Meroitic they can read it aloud, but the language itself remains largely untranslated because so little comparative material exists. It is one of the great unsolved puzzles of African history. And it is unsolved not because the writing is primitive, but because the civilization that produced it was so self-contained and so thoroughly disrupted by later conquest that the linguistic keys were lost. The fact that we can read Meroitic phonetically but not understand it is the equivalent of being able to pronounce every word of a book in a language you have never studied. The writing worked. The civilization that produced it worked. What was lost was the continuity of scholarship that would have preserved the translation. And then there is Ge'ez. The ancient Ethiopian script, Ge'ez, also called Ethiopic, developed in the Kingdom of Axum in the 1st centuries CE and has been in continuous use for over 2,000 years. It is the liturgical script of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, one of the oldest Christian institutions in the world. It is the ancestor of the Amharic and Tigrinya scripts used in Ethiopia and Eritrea today. Millions of people read and write in scripts descended from Ge'ez every day. Ge'ez is one of the oldest continuously used writing systems on Earth. While the Latin alphabet disappeared from Europe after the fall of Rome and had to be relearned during the Renaissance, while ancient Greek fell out of common use for centuries, Ge'ez continued in churches, in monasteries, in manuscripts, in daily religious practice, without interruption. And there is Nsibidi, the indigenous writing system of the Igbo and Ejagham peoples of what is now Nigeria and Cameroon. Nsibidi uses symbolic marks to represent concepts, actions, and communications, and its origins predate European contact with the region by an unknown but significant period. It was sophisticated enough to have specialized forms. One set of symbols for public communication, another known only to initiates of the Ekpe secret society. A writing system with levels of access, with encoded knowledge, with a social function that went beyond simple record-keeping. When European colonizers first encountered Nsibidi in the 19th century, they documented it with a mixture of fascination and dismissiveness, noting that it existed while simultaneously fitting it into their framework of African primitivism by calling it a pictographic system rather than a true writing. That framing was deliberate. A fully functional indigenous African writing system was incompatible with the narrative of African intellectual inferiority. So they minimized it, as they minimized everything. Historian Ayele Bekeri at Cornell University has written extensively on the African origins of writing, arguing that the exclusion of African writing systems from the standard history of literacy is not an accident of scholarship, but a consequence of the same ideological framework that excluded African mathematics, African medicine, and African astronomy from their proper place in the story of human intellectual development. The standard history of writing goes cave paintings, then Mesopotamian cuneiform, then Egyptian hieroglyphics, then Phoenician, then Greek, then the alphabet we use today. Africa appears in that story only as a backdrop, as the location where hieroglyphics happened before the real story moved to the Mediterranean. What that history erases is the African origin of the alphabetic principle itself. What it erases is Meroitic. What it erases is Ge'ez. What it erases is Nsibidi. What it erases is the full, continuous, diverse tradition of African literacy that existed long before Europe developed its own. The next time you write your name, consider what you are doing. You are making marks on a surface to represent the sounds of your spoken language. You are using an alphabetic system, one symbol per sound, that allows any literate person to decode what you have written. That system was invented in Africa by African and Semitic workers who looked at Egyptian hieroglyphics and saw in them the germ of something more portable, more flexible, more powerful, who took the intellectual leap from logographic to alphabetic, who created the tool that would eventually carry every letter of every language that uses an alphabet anywhere in the world. Your ancestors did not receive literacy from Europe. The evidence suggests the opposite. Europe received its alphabet from a chain of transmission that begins in Africa. And the people who started that chain were working in African soil, surrounded by African knowledge, building on an African tradition of written communication that stretched back to the hieroglyphics of the Nile Valley. Every letter traces back to Africa. You already knew how to write. Your ancestors taught the world.